Hello and welcome to Zooming In on Hate, where we offer some clarity on the world of online hate, one conversation at a time.
From policies and strategies to the latest trends and themes, we will zoom in on what really matters in making the online space safer and more transparent for everyone. My name is Jordi Nijnhuis.
And I'm Lydia El Khoury. Now, today's episode is a powerful one. It's called From Birthrates to Deepfakes, How Sexuality is Weaponized. Now, we're diving into different ways online narratives around gender, identity, and sexuality are being used to fuel fear, disinformation, and even violence, both online and offline.
In the first half of this episode, we'll explore how declining birth rates and the far right's great replacement theory are being twisted into a blame game, one that often targets women, feminism, and sexual freedom. And we'll ask questions: who are pushing these narratives? Why are they spreading so fast? And what is the impact on policy and public perception?
And then in the second half, we'll take a look at a more personal and painful perspective: digital sexual violence. From revenge porn to AI-generated deepfakes, we'll hear how technology is being used to control, punish, and exploit, especially targeting women, LGBTQ plus individuals, and young people.
So, two different conversations, but both deeply connected. This episode is about power, fear, and how sexuality continues to be policed in the digital age. To understand how these weaponized narratives around sexuality and identity take shape and how they spread, we now turn to one of my own colleagues at Dare to Be Grey.
Laura Bucher is a research officer at Dare to Be Grey and part of the European Observatory of Online Hate. Using the EOOH dashboard, she analysed how themes like declining birth rates, demographic anxiety, and anti-feminist rhetoric have been shaping online conversations, particularly within far-right and conspiracy-driven spaces. Hi Laura, thanks a million for joining us on Zooming In on Hate. So let's start with the basics. What made you decide to explore the connection between declining birth rates, the great replacement theory, and misogyny?
Yes, so one of my first research topic while using the EOOH dashboard was related to the great replacement theory, a theory that interested me because of its enormous influence and also shaping the mainstream politics nowadays. And while researching through the dashboard, I found that a lot of the conversation were revolving fertility rates. So the central idea was that fertility rates, birth rates among the white population are gradually dropping drastically, that increased birth rates among non-white immigrants are leading to the demographic replacement of Europeans and the white population. So this angle motivated me to explore this connection more deeply.
We often hear about the great replacement in a racial or anti-immigration context. How does misogyny come into play here?
So at the core of the theory is also the obsession with demographics and the obsession over controlling women's body. The notion of this theory is that why women are not having enough children, and that the falling birth rates among white population is leading to the replacement by the non-white population. In the white power movement in general, everything is framed through gender and reproduction. Gender can be considered the main entry point from many different extremist groups. So the great replacement theory often offers a perfect example of how different hateful narratives can intersect with each other, and proponents of these theories have found ways to bring together different resentments towards different minority groups. So these are not only migrants, but also women and especially feminists. So on one hand, they spread racist messages portraying migrants as a threat due to the mass migration, but on the other hand, they target women and they position them as both the problem and the solution to limit the replacement of the white population. So they blame them for not having enough children, but at the same time, they portray a narrative in which they urge them to change this trend. And of course, while doing that, they very much undermine their right to body autonomy and to the right to reproductive health.
And you mentioned that these narratives they're pretty widespread. 61% in France are worried about these narratives. So it seems like there's an effective strategy behind it. Can you maybe speak to what kind of people or groups are pushing this narrative, and also what platforms are they using most effectively?
Yes, sure. So I would say there are different actors who are spreading such a birth rate panic narrative. So the first type of actor is, yeah, as I just mentioned briefly, white supremacists and extreme right wing circles. Maybe it's worth mentioning that, for example, before committing the mass shooting attack in Christchurch, in 2019, Brenton Tarrant wrote the Grey Replacement Manifesto, and he started this manifesto mentioning that the birth rate is the one element that he wanted his readers to remember, uh, really expressing a big threat for and a big concern over the demographic trend, and basically with underlining the idea that uh, mm, the main goal is to restore traditional norms and gender roles. This tells how birth rate is very much central in white supremacist movements, but also is important to know that this theory has definitely expanded beyond the fringe environment, the fringe social media. This narrative definitely found political representation and social acceptance. Um, and a research I found from the Institute of Strategic Dialogue found that the grave replacement and the number of tweets mentioning this theory have almost triplicated in 4 years, from 2014 to 2018. So this again tells how much this theory is very much widespread in the mainstream sphere. And maybe coming back to your second question on the platforms that in which these theory are very much widespread, I can talk about from my own perspective through the EOOH dashboard research. I would say that most of the narrative I've seen are on Twitter. I also found some on TikTok, and 4chan is also a big social media.
Thanks, Laura. That's incredibly interesting. There's this emerging narrative that ties feminism, independence, and birth rate decline into one problem, I'd say in inverted commas. How how dangerous, how rife is this? And can you tell us a little bit about why that's gaining traction?
Yes, experts tracking far right movements say that the speed to which these type of narratives are spreading is very, very high, especially among the young population. And as I mentioned a bit before, I think among this, yeah, extremists white group, gender and reproduction is seen as very like the main entry point for many radical groups. And the idea is that men are in a weaker position because basically women are not doing their job in reproducing. Um, and I think, in my opinion, the danger uh, for this narrative is that is the extent to which women's rights, including reproductive rights, are questioned, and the extent to which these extreme ideas are being brought to a wider public and eventually have the potential to influence political decision. And of course, we know that women reproductive rights are not to be taken for granted. For example, let's of course think of the U.S. Roe versus Wade overturn that very much backlashed women's rights through ultra conservative laws. And we also see this in Europe with conservative policies against abortion in Poland, Hungary, just to name a few. So I guess, yeah, it has it is a dangerous narrative, of course, and maybe another risk I can foresee is that because this misogynistic content is like an ideological link across different extremist group, we do have the risk of having this content be normalized in the online space, because we all know that the online space are the platform in which especially young people use to connect, network, socialize with others.
Thank you so much, Laura. And I think this research really shows how narratives online can be used to shame and control, especially with topics surrounding gender and identity. And that control doesn't stop at language.
And now, in the second half of this episode, we turn to Omni Miranda Martone from the Sexual Violence Prevention Association to talk about something just as urgent: digital sexual violence. We started by asking the question, what is digital sexual violence?
Yeah, so digital sexual violence is any form of sexual violence that takes place online or in a virtual space. So it encompasses all forms of non-consensual explicit materials, which are formerly known as revenge pornography or deepfake pornography. So revenge pornography is authentic non-consensual explicit materials, and deepfake pornography is artificial non-consensual explicit materials. But it also includes other forms of digital sexual violence like harassment and specific types of hate speech and all of that are all sexual in nature. And it's very important to understand that sexual violence includes gender-based violence, but is not explicitly gender-based violence. There are some forms of sexual violence that, instead of being perpetrated on the axes of sexism, are actually perpetrated on the axes of other forms of oppression, like racism or homophobia or transphobia. There's a lot of others, but I just use those three as an example. So there are some forms of digital sexual violence. I feel like there's the traditional ones that people think of, but there's also things like very sexualized racist messages, or, for example, very sexualized deepfake imagery of celebrities who may be queer or LGBTQ plus in some way. So in general, there's a lot of types of digital sexual violence, but it's any form of sexual-based exploitation or oppression or abuse that takes place in a virtual space.
And I want to zone in on one word in your organization, which is prevention. I think it's one we all strive to achieve in the work in combating hate speech. Talk to us a little bit about what you do in terms of prevention.
Basically, at the SVPA, our approach to prevention has three prongs. So there's primary, secondary, and tertiary prevention. And within digital sexual violence, primary prevention means making sure that somebody does not have the beliefs, values, attitudes, knowledge, or lack thereof that leads them to perpetrate digital sexual violence. So that can look like a lot of things. That can look like, making sure that people are aware of how harmful and painful and traumatic digital sexual violence is. Even though it may not be in the real physical space, it is very much still traumatic for victims. So that's one way to make sure that somebody doesn't perpetrate if they know how harmful it is. But another way is just that knowledge, beliefs, and attitudes. So knowledge, for example, of consent. What does consent look like? Why is this harmful? Does it make me a bad person if I'm creating, deepfake pornography of somebody without their consent? Yes, making sure that people know that, really setting those cultural norms. So really those values, beliefs, attitudes, knowledge, and lack thereof, that's that primary form of prevention. And then there's the secondary form of prevention. And that basically says once somebody already has those values, beliefs, attitudes, knowledge, or lack thereof, that's going to lead them to perpetrate digital sexual violence, how can we prevent them from doing it? And so there's two ways. One is, how do we reverse them? How do we reverse those values, beliefs, attitudes, knowledge, and lack thereof? How do we reverse that? Is that possible with bystander intervention campaigns, other education campaigns, other normalization in media? How can we do that? But also, if they have those values, beliefs, and attitudes, and if we're not able to change them, how do we prevent them from taking action? So that can look like if somebody tries to post a deepfake, there being some sort of filter that prevents them from posting it, that says, this is flagged because this seems like harmful content. So that's secondary prevention. And tertiary prevention really bridges that gap between prevention and response. Tertiary prevention says once somebody's already done the harmful thing, some harm has already been caused, how do we prevent it from spreading or repeating? And so in that sense, we see something like, let's say that person that I just mentioned was successful in posting it, but let's say somebody reports it, if it's immediately taken down, that's tertiary prevention. That prevented quite a lot of harm than if it was left up for days at a time. And there's a lot of different forms of tertiary prevention. As I said, it bridges that gap between prevention and response. But that really says once somebody has those values, beliefs, and attitudes, takes action on them, how do we prevent that harm from continuing, expanding, or repeating?
Excellent. Look, so beautifully set out. Thanks. It's crystal clear. So back to digital sexual violence. How prevalent is it, Omni? What are you seeing?
Right now, digital sexual violence is the highest increasing form of sexual violence, and it's increasing exponentially. So up until about 2 years ago, we weren't seeing that many deepfakes online, and the ones that we were seeing were usually of celebrities. I'm not saying that's okay, that's also not okay, but right now we're really in a bit of an epidemic of sexual violence, especially of digital sexual violence, partially because deepfake technology has increased so much. So it used to be that for somebody to create some form of a deepfake, they needed to have a high-powered computer, a lot of technical knowledge and ability, like the ability to code, and quite a lot of photos of the victim's face. And because of that, it was typically only celebrities, because how else would somebody get 50 to 100 photos of a victim's face? And also they're spending all this effort, and it takes a lot of time to do. So it was mostly celebrities and public figures, and they weren't that good. But now the technology's increased, it's improved, and we're at a place where somebody can make digital sexual violence of somebody else, specifically a deepfake pornography of somebody, within seconds. You can do it on a website, you can do it on a mobile phone. You don't need to have any technical ability or any technical computers or software or anything like that. You can do it on a simple website in a matter of seconds, and you only need 1 or 2 photos of the victim's face, which typically perpetrators are getting from their LinkedIn or their work profiles, like their company's websites. So really because of that, we're seeing exponential growth within digital sexual violence. It's more than doubling every 6 months. So that means that it's more than 4 times every year. That is significant exponential growth, and it's really terrifying. We've gone to a couple 100,000 to millions that we're now seeing online, and we're primarily seeing women and minorities targeted between roughly the ages of 13 and about 25. 13, yeah.
Wow.
It's really upsetting. It's happening a lot in schools. We're seeing it a lot in colleges as well, but we're seeing a lot of it with young adults, specifically against women and minorities.
That's pretty shocking.
It's really devastating that we have, as a society, not improved our prevention well enough to prevent this to youth, especially given the impacts that it has long term. It's very shocking and upsetting, and I think that is one of the things we really need to prioritize, is getting it together and making sure we have multi-pronged solutions to preventing digital sexual violence against youth and against young people.
Why did you undertake this challenge of digital sexual violence, Omni?
So we originally started working on this issue because we had a victim come to us. She usually does want to remain anonymous, so I'm just going to refer to her as A. So A came to us, and basically she said that somebody at her gym asked her out, and she said no, and he seemed kind of annoyed, but everything was fine, seems normal. He asked her out again, she said no again, and then about 2 weeks after that interaction, a different man from her gym came up to her and said, hey, that guy that asked you out, he made deepfake porn of you and has been showing it to all the other guys at the gym. And she didn't even know what deepfake porn was at this point. This was about 1.5 years ago. Didn't even know what deepfake porn was at that point, and was like, what do you mean? And it was very confusing, and talked to some of the other guys at the gym, and then they reported it to the gym manager, who luckily did take action. They did remove the man, but then he posted it on Instagram. And it eventually did get removed from Instagram, but it took a little while. And basically she was like, well, I have to be able to do something. And she went to a lawyer, And she said, here's all this evidence, right? I have people, like some of the guys from the gym were willing to move forward and say, yes, he showed us this deepfake, and he posted it and all of that stuff. And she was told she couldn't take action, partially because he admitted it was a deepfake. So it's really, at that point, it's not deception. So it's not defamation.
So it takes the fake out of deep fake.
Yeah, because he admitted that it was not real. So it's not deception at that point. Right now, defamation is the only laws we have, and she couldn't use the defamation laws because he admitted to everyone he showed it to in person, and when he posted it online, he admitted that he faked it. He bragged about the fact that he faked it, and it had the little watermark from the app that he had used to make it. And that's just like not okay. She had no way to take action. She did everything that she could possibly do to try to advocate for herself. She went and got a lawyer. She had all this evidence, and yet she couldn't take action. And that was so alarming to me. And then we started looking into it, and that's when we realized that deepfake pornography specifically is the highest growing form of sexual violence and the highest growing form of digital sexual violence. And that was really when we started working on this issue. And then we've been working on it, as I said, for a little over a year, if not more, when I myself was a victim of deepfakes, and that, made everything all the more real and all the more concrete. And I also just do want to recognize as well that we've been working with Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Representative Laura Lee. And unfortunately, both of them have been victims of deepfake pornography. And these are representatives, and they also have no way to take action against it. And it's just really not okay. The common folk don't have any way to take action, and I think representatives know that, and that's why we've really taken action, and that's why we've really taken a legislative approach, because we need legislation for this issue.
So, Omni, tell me what somebody can do if they come across a piece of content and they don't know what to do about it.
Yeah, so we had a lot of people come to us with this exact question, and because of that, we created the 5 R's of digital bystander intervention. The 5 R's is respond, report, record, rebuke, and resource. And the goal with the 5 R's is that there are options. It's more like a menu and not like a list of things to do in order. It's a menu. You can do 1, you can do more than 1, you can do all 5 if you want, but the goal is that the person who's come across it, the bystander, is able to keep themselves safe by choosing the option that they're the most comfortable with that's going to also maintain their safety. So to go through them, respond is basically to be direct. And this is, I feel, best in situations where maybe there's a group chat and somebody in the group chat shared a deepfake of somebody else. We see this at schools quite a lot. There'll be a group chat with a bunch of kids from the school, typically a bunch of boys. Someone will share a deepfake of somebody else and be like, hee, I made a deepfake of so-and-so. And if somebody responds directly to that person and says, hey, that's not okay, that's a great way to respond. So direct is usually directed to the person, typically in a private manner, usually not a public call out. Sometimes it can be, but typically private. Then there's reporting. So reporting is to the platform itself, but it can also be to an authority like the police or another government agency, and then it can also be to like a school, a college, or a workplace. Reporting it, making sure that some authority knows. There's also recording it. So this is like literally recording it, writing it down, screen recording it, just writing, so-and-so made a deepfake of so-and-so on this day. Some form of way of saying, this happened, I know it happened, because the internet, although the internet is forever, it's also pretty easy for people to scrub things off of the internet. So making sure that somebody in some way is recording it. That can be the victim themselves, or once again, it can be a bystander. And then rebuking it. Rebuking it's a little bit different than responding, because rebuking it isn't saying, hey, people shouldn't do this. So it's always better if people are going to do that to say, I came across it, like to not share it, and instead say, I came across a deepfake of somebody. I want to remind everybody that that's not okay. That's not tolerated here. That is rape culture. We are not going to normalize that. So a post like that, that's vague, that doesn't directly link to it, is really effective. We do want to make sure when people are rebuking it, if they share it and say, this thing I just shared is bad, that's actually still increasing it, still boosting it in the algorithm. We don't want that. So rebuking it is usually more vague and is not directed to the perpetrator. It's to the general public, making sure that we are constructing a society that does not tolerate this. And then the last one is resource, and this is direct to the victim. If the person knows the victim, they can reach out to them and say, hey, here's your options, or hey, do you want me to come with you to go report this to the police or our school or whomever? Or hey, there's a take it down tool that, I found online that can help you take this down, or there's the Stop NCII tool that if you would like help, we can use that together. I'll go through it with you. Something like that. Some form of here's a few resources, here's a few options, and those are are the 5 R's. And once again, we really do encourage people to use 1 or 2, not all of them, and to make sure that they're doing what's going to keep them safe. I would argue that the respond and rebuke option can be dangerous depending on who the person is. But it's also a way, if somebody is a content creator and has a large following, doing the rebuking option and saying this is bad actually will have a really big impact. So it definitely depends on the person, and that's why it's like a menu. People can choose what they want when they want. In one instance, they may feel safe doing one thing, and in another instance, they may feel safe doing the other one. That's totally fine.
That brings us to the end of this episode of Zooming In on Hate. Thank you for joining us. From the ideological targeting of women's bodies through birth rate panic to the deeply personal harm caused by digital sexual violence, it's clear that sexuality and identity are still being used as tools of control, punishment, and indeed fear.
And what struck me the most is how both stories show different sides of the same pattern. Whether it's through political narratives or platform enabled abuse, the message is often the same: reduce people, especially women, queer communities, or minorities, to symbols of decline, disruption, or disorder.
And indeed, that's why it's so important to keep track and keep an eye on these narratives as they evolve and become more and more sophisticated. And we need to keep asking hard questions like, what about platform responsibility? What about policy? About social norms that let this thrive online? Because at the heart of it, this isn't just a tech problem or a fringe conspiracy. It's about power and whose voices are amplified or indeed erased.
So, if this episode resonated with you or raised new questions, we would love to hear from you. You can find our research and articles at www.eooh.eu, but you can also reach out and follow us on LinkedIn via the European Observatory of Online Hate.
Thanks so much for listening. And please stay tuned for the next episode of Zooming In on Hate, which is brought to you with much appreciation to the European Union.
Thank you so much. Goodbye for now.
Bye bye.